Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We move now into the final segment of the then and now presentations. And our next presenter, we're very, very pleased to have her. She is Dr. Barbara Carby, who is the Director of Disaster Risk Reduction Center, DRRC, of the University of West Indies. She's former Director General of Jamaica's Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, ODPEM, and served most recently as the first Director of Hazard Management Cayman Islands, where she established a full-time national office for disaster risk management and developed a national strategic framework for disaster risk reduction, which will guide our national programs. Dr. Carby earned her PhD in geochemistry at the UWI. She possesses a BSc in geology, as well as a diploma in applied geology from the École Nationale Supérieure de Géologie in France. I hope I didn't butcher that name too badly. But please help to welcome Dr. Barbara Carby.
Good afternoon, everyone. Almost feels like coming home. I seem to remember living here at some point. It's always nice to come back to the Cayman Islands. So what I've been asked to do is to look at the then and now, but from a regional perspective. So I've called it Judging Progress. And just to tell you a little bit about how I went about the task, this is very much a qualitative approach. The major limitation I had was time. For a presentation such as this, I would like to have been able to do some research, maybe gather some primary data and so on. But this was very much in the emergency response mode. So, but I had only a day to do the presentation, so we had to sort of temporarily suspend our academic hat and just do a presentation. So what I decided to do was to look at a document called the Kingston Declaration, which was done in 2005, as you will see, and to use that as a reference point. Then I looked at the gaps that were identified then and some recommendations that were made in that document. And I then asked the simple question: has the recommendation or the gap been addressed? So a simple yet elegant method of approaching the problem. Well, that's my version anyway. So the Kingston Declaration goes back to 2005, the year after that watershed year for hazard impacts in the region. There was a regional meeting called Beyond 2004 Events, Lessons for the Caribbean Region. This meeting took place in Jamaica, and I know some persons here actually attended that meeting. And out of that meeting came recommendations which were supposed to provide guidance for Caribbean countries in order to improve their disaster risk management capabilities. And the recommendations of this meeting are called the Kingston Declaration 2005. So, were you not hearing me? Okay. Is that better now? Okay. So, 2004 recorded a series of hazard impacts which resulted in over 6,000 casualties in the region. Actually, that might be a little skewed in that of that 6,000, 5,000 of them. I think with your material. Yes, of that 6,000, 5,000 plus of them actually occurred in Haiti, unfortunately. Are you hearing me now? Yes. Okay. In addition, there was over 6 billion US in terms of damage, loss of assets in 8 Caribbean states. And as you well know, here in Cayman, damage here was greater than GDP. And the same situation in Grenada. I think in Cayman it was like 134%, and in Grenada it was like 175% of GDP. So, I mean, this was, as I said, a watershed year, which really tested the region's disaster risk management capabilities, and I think formed the platform for many advances which have taken place in the next decade. So, what were some of the recommendations from that Kingston Declaration? To encourage research and training in disaster risk management in the Caribbean by establishing or strengthening, as appropriate, permanent capacity for assessing vulnerability and risk. And what I've tried to do here is to list some of the initiatives which have taken place, which would address that recommendation. So we know that there has been quite a bit of training in community vulnerability and capacity assessment methods. And that in many countries has been spearheaded by the Red Cross. Then there was a very large project on hazard mapping and vulnerability assessment, which was funded by the Inter-American Development Bank, and that looked at developing methods for vulnerability assessment, hazard mapping for the tourism sector. Very important, as a part of that project, persons were trained in the methods that were developed. So there was some capacity building there within the tourism sector. Part of that project also looked at how the tourism sector could be integrated into the national disaster risk management mechanisms. So coming out of that project, the countries involved were trained in setting up EOC. So there would be a tourism EOC, which would link back into the National Emergency Operations Center for the countries. Then, since 2004, we've made really quite a bit of progress in terms of hazard mapping, climate modeling, risk mapping and analysis, and this has happened in multiple countries. I would mention here another donor-funded project, the Carby Risk Atlas project, which looked at flood and seismic hazard mapping and risk analysis in Barbados and Jamaica, and that was funded by the World Bank. Now that project introduced a platform called GeoNode, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is going to be very important, I think, for the whole matter of data sharing and data management across the region. Research and training, the Disaster Risk Reduction Center, which I now represent, was established in direct response to the impact of Hurricane Ivan. The Vice Chancellor, Professor Harris, looked at what had happened in the region and decided that UWI had to mount some kind of response. So the center was conceived then in the aftermath of Ivan, even though it took some time to be operationalized. And as part of that, there's an offering of an MSc in disaster risk management. There's also research in disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction, MPhil and PhD programs. There are also programs at other universities within the region. The School of the Environment at the University of Guyana does offer courses, as well as the University of Technology in Jamaica. There are also universities which offer associate degrees and undergraduate courses as well. So, albeit that there may be gaps, I think the research and training aspect has improved quite a bit over the last 10 years. Another recommendation to encourage research and training in disaster risk management in the Caribbean by creating and maintaining a hazard and disaster database. Now, when you've been to as many regional meetings as I have, you realize that this matter of data comes up again and again and again. I would say that we are making, what shall we say, incremental steps. Fred, would you agree? No, No, not even incremental. Yes. We're nibbling away at the problem of data. But we haven't really gotten to the stage where, say for example, the meteorologists are at, where there is free exchange of data globally, and where you have all these real-time systems that produce and analyze data. In the disaster risk management field, we're far from that. It happens to some extent in the earthquake field, seismic field, and the Met guys are very, very good at that. And we're working at it. So, now a program called Days Inventar, which was actually started in Latin America, is now being used by some countries to track hazard impacts. One of the advantages of the Days Inventar system is that it tracks not only major events, so what we would call national disasters, but it allows you to track small events which cumulatively make a big impact on the country. So I know for sure that Belize and Jamaica are using Days Inventar. I'm not sure which other countries in the region may be using it. Joanna, do you know at all?
Antigua.
Antigua as well.
We've used it sometimes.
Yes. So this one I would recommend that the Cayman Islands looks at in terms of tracking impact, because from that then you can work out how your vulnerability is increasing or decreasing and so on. Now, there is an open source software called GeoNode, which is promoted by the World Bank, and some countries are using it now. I mentioned here St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Risk Atlas project, which looks at Jamaica and Barbados, also use GeoNode. It's a platform that allows you to store, analyze, share, and display data, both as data, metadata, but also, very importantly, spatially. So you can actually display your risk maps and your hazard maps on this platform. The scientists can update it in real time if they wish, and then all of that data can be shared among the scientists. What I like about this program as well is that it also has the potential, because it is web-based, to include the public. So you could set it up so that the public could go onto that website and look at your risk maps, look at your hazard maps, and so on. Of course, they wouldn't have the, they wouldn't be able to add data. I mean, that would be a restricted function, but they could certainly access the maps and the data and so on. There was a recommendation for organizing disaster management fairs. I have not heard of one that has happened. Then, did someone say they knew of one?
Said soon.
Soon. Oh, okay. Good. All right. So the other part now has to do with preparedness here. Emergency planning, training, and simulation exercises. Well, this is a standard approach from most countries in the region. We know that the Cayman Islands has been doing their hurricane simulation exercises for decades now, and perhaps do other simulations as well. People do earthquake simulations, oil spills, and so on. So that is ongoing. Risk management. To encourage the development of risk transfer and risk sharing mechanisms was another need identified. Now, we all know that at the regional level, for the countries, we have what? Right. CRIF. So, CRIF was established actually as a direct result of that 2004 year. Some of us have our reservations, I would say, about this, but nevertheless, it does provide some interim bridging finance for governments when they have had a major disaster. Now, I know Cayman and BRAC may not agree with that, because when Cayman and BRAC suffered Paloma, there was no bail from CRIF. But this is why now you have to read the fine print of these agreements at all times. So the CRIF exists. However, there was also a recommendation about risk transfer and risk sharing mechanisms for communities. And there has been some progress in that. Haiti in particular. They have several macro-insurance and macrofinance schemes which have been implemented there. So macro-enterprises, small farms, low-income households can access this macro-insurance or macrofinancing. And that is being expanded throughout the region, or the thought is to expand it throughout the region. I know they have been discussions in Jamaica about accessibility of macro insurance, which is a really big gap in our risk transfer plans. Integration into development planning. There is a need to better incorporate disaster risk management into development policies and action plans. Well, yes, we all agree with that. And we've been saying this for a long time. Now, the problem here, friends, is not intent. There is always the intent to do it. You see that it is included in the regional CDM strategy. It's also incorporated into many long-term development plans of countries. The problem seems to be, how do we actually do it? I mean, we know the theory. In practice, the monitoring of this, the enforcement of the zoning laws, the planning regulations, the building codes, regionally is extremely weak. So though we know what to do, the theory, there's a big gulf, canyon, I would say, between the theory that we know and the practice that we do. So I would say, for this one in particular, there is recognition, but inadequate action. Resilience. There is a need to build greater community resilience. Well, the concept of resilience is now widely used, not only at community level. And across the region, we have multiple projects looking at building resilience, whether it be sectorally or at a community level. And community resilience is including the regional CDM strategy as well. Now, there has been some progress which was not mentioned in 2004, but which I thought I would mention here. Climate change adaptation is completely absent from the 2005 declaration. Now it is routinely included in disaster risk reduction planning. There's also increasing appreciation of livelihood security as part of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. So we're beginning to recognize that livelihood security is an important part also of resilience. Then the use of information and communications technology. I mean, there are numerous examples that I could give, but increased use of ICT has actually led to increased modeling, risk analysis, and mapping. And also now, the use of social media for communication, information, public awareness, and even warning systems. So that's a big step that has been made, or these are big steps that have been made since 2004. I also should mention the whole matter of what happened after the Indian Ocean tsunami. That was useful in a way, in that it increased global awareness of the tsunami threat. And the Caribbean was no exception to that. After that tsunami, everybody was saying, oh, what's a tsunami? And we have tsunamis and so on. So there was a window of opportunity there to build public awareness. There were also links established into the Pacific tsunami warning system, and then a decision to establish a Caribbean tsunami warning system, which I think is still being worked on. As a result of that, there was an increase in instrumentation. And that increase in instrumentation is also useful for providing data on earthquakes. So from that, we increased our capacity, not only for tsunamis, but also for earthquakes. Last, definitely not least, and extremely important, post-2004, there was a greater focus on disaster risk management by policy and political communities. So I found that after 2004, that season that we had in the region, then the tsunami in the Indian Ocean, politicians and policymakers were beginning to sit up and take notice. So much so that now, when you go to some global meetings, which looks at global frameworks for disaster risk management. There's a very good representation of these two communities at those meetings. The same thing goes for regional meetings. And you will know that I would have to add a caveat to that. And what is a caveat? Or not? The awareness is there. What is a caveat?
Got the job done.
Huh?
Got the job done.
Yes, but with what? The resources. That is a caveat. That the resources are always inadequate. Because you know how it is in the Caribbean. The budget simply cannot stretch to everybody. So very often, despite this awareness, disaster risk management actually suffers a bit. Yes, Ron?
I'm going to say that's a caveat that I usually put, but I don't necessarily agree. But we can discuss that after.
Agreed. Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think my time is up. Thank you very much.